What if we always cooperate? A group of us, we always cooperate. Well, there's a problem with that, because then a psychopath will pop up randomly, and he's like a shark in a tank of guppies. He just eats all the guppies, and that's the end of the situation. So if all we do is cooperate, someone who's non-cooperative can immediately get everything we have. And so then the problem becomes, well, you don't want a tank full of sharks, and you don't want a tank full of guppies. What should you do? And the answer, because this has been played out on computer simulations, by the way, all over the world, is, well, how do you ensure stability? And it's something like, I trust you. I start with the presumption that you're trustworthy. If you react in a trustworthy manner, away we go. We trade, and it's transparent. If you screw me, I whack you. And then I offer to trade with you again. Cool. And that seems to be, now that's really worth thinking about, because there's a shadow idea in there, right? It's like, I trust you, but if you bother me, I'll bite you. And I'll bite you hard. But then we can trade again. So it doesn't, what that allows is that you can screw up, you know, and you will. So it means that we can continue to play even if you're not perfect. But you're going to get punished an appropriate amount if you're not perfect, and then we'll try to get the game going again. And so I would say that's an example of a Piagetian equilibrated solution, roughly speaking. And it could be that that does have something to do with the way that a culture learns to become non-corrupt. But it still doesn't explain how that gets implemented. You know, so, okay. So there's a walled city, you know, and that place exists. That's in France, and unfortunately I can't remember the name of it at the moment. It's one of the best preserved medieval cities in the world, and there's actually quite a few of those left in Europe. I've seen a lot of them, and they're staggeringly beautiful, unbelievably beautiful. So, but you see how those things were constructed, eh? Because there's a double wall, right? And so you think about, well, what's the psychological message that's embodied in that city? And the message is, inside the walls, where there's a civilized organization, you're safe from barbarians and chaos. And the barbarians and chaos surround that, and so it's better to be inside the city. Now obviously, the problem is the city is walled, so it's not that easy to get out. You're trapped in there, you know, in some way. So you could see, well, you could find, you imagine if you're a teenager in a medieval city like that, you're 12 years old or 13 years old, you're off with your ratty little buddies, and the first thing you want to do is go outside the wall and see what's out there. But by the same token, if there weren't any walls, well, then the barbarians would come in and they'd steal everything you've had, and everyone would be dead, and that would not be a good thing. So, you know, it was also a place to store produce, agricultural produce, so that it wouldn't rot and wouldn't get eaten by bugs and wouldn't be stolen by thieves. You know, so, and that was also extraordinarily useful. And so there's a belief system embedded in that. That would be the medieval world order. But as well as there being a belief system and a psychological representation, it's obviously a physical structure, and it's also a mode of relationship. And all of that together constitutes the Great Father. It's not just the belief. And some of that's going to be tyrannical, because there's a king, and some of it's going to be beneficial, because, well, maybe better to have one king than 30 kings that are having a war. So that's been the dilemma in American foreign policy. You know, if you give American foreign policy some credit, you know, which is a reasonable thing to do, because part of what the Americans were always trying to figure out, especially since the end of the World War was, is it better to have a tyrant or take them out and have 30 of them? You know, and the answer to that is, who knows? You know, so they took the tyrant out of Iraq. What happened? You know, the country basically fractured. And it happens very frequently. It's a quasi-failed state. You get little fiefdoms of warlords, basically, who are certainly no improvement over the original tyrant, and they tear the place apart. Now, I'm not making a case for the utility of a tyrant, but the opposite of order is chaos. And chaos can be just as destructive as tyranny, or maybe it can be more destructive. So, you know, the same thing happened to some degree with the Arab Spring. It was like, okay, poof, chaos. It's like everybody thinks, well, this is a chance for a new beginning. And, you know, it seems like in places like Tunisia, that actually worked, and things loosened up a bit in Morocco too, so there's some indication of some progress. But in places like Libya, it's like, well, that looks like it's degenerating into complete hell, and you see the same thing in many places in the Middle East where the Arab Spring occurred. So that's also why it's so necessary to understand what lurks behind tyranny, because what lurks behind tyranny is not freedom, it's chaos. And chaos has the potential for freedom, but then it depends on what people do with the chaos. So, and it's not self-evident that the chaos is better than the tyranny, and part of the reason for that is that in every society there are agents of chaos, and they're people, they're often at, you know, relatively low strata on the dominance hierarchy. They're usually young men, they're usually extremely aggressive, they're usually incredibly resentful and displaced, and for them, as soon as chaos appears, it's like, it's open season. You know, the society has been restructured and they can just go about taking everything they want. So, you know, you see that even in countries like Canada, where those are the guys who riot after a hockey game. You know, they need no excuse whatsoever to go out in chaos and act like absolute barbarians. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, but it's a causal interrelationship. You know, there's a whole chapter on that in the last third of Maps of Meaning. It describes the relationship between the two halves of the adversary. There's a nihilistic element and a fascistic element. You know, and once the value hierarchy falls apart, one response is, let's go in there and get up the gold and rebuild something. You know, I'd say that would be the heroic element. But the adversarial element is, well, everything's fallen apart, it's every man for himself, and the fascistic element would be me, right? I'm going to exert power, not for competence, dominance.